Welcome to part 2 of Capriza UX and UI training. This section will cover layer 4, skeleton. In this layer, we finally start to make use of interface elements to allow the user to move through the information architecture we established in previous layers. We will focus on 3 key areas to optimize the arrangement of these elements for maximum effect and efficiency. First, use signage to orient users. Now that you have a structure in place, how will the user navigate from page to page? We'll discuss the importance of wayfinding and how to facilitate it with effective signage. Second, provide adequate feedback wherever possible. How will we reassure the user that actions have been performed successfully? Feedback is a core tenet of good user experience design, and we'll talk about where it should be in a micro app. Lastly, arrange elements to help users complete their task. How should we position information and actions to reduce decision-making time? Given that this is a mobile application, assume that the user is in a hurry. How can we facilitate scanning and reduce the cognitive load? We'll cover the many interface elements designers can use to enable their users. Let's dive in. Let's begin by discussing signage. Your user should always be comfortable answering these 3 questions regardless of where they are in your micro app. Where am I? Where can I go from here? And what can I do here? Quickly and confidently answering these questions is essential to human orientation and is present in the real world as well. This is where an understanding of user needs and objectives really pay off. My favorite example of orientation and wayfinding in the real world is airport signage. The best airports always provide adequate signage to the traveler at every location to ensure they know where they came from and where they're going. Navigation signs help you identify where you are, such as Terminal B, what's here, such as gates G and H that way, gates B, C, D, E, F, gates the other way, casino down the hall, etc., and what else you could do, such as shop at the store, currency exchange, first aid, and so on. The next time you visit an airport, see if you can confidently answer these questions at any point during the visit. Someone had to design this. How to best communicate these points to your users depends on the navigation of your micro app. Navigation can be divided into several steps. The first is linear. With this type of navigation, next and back or previous elements help carry the user through the flow. Since the natural flow of the English language is left to right, it's best to represent next as moving to the right, so as to going forward in space, and back or previous as moving to the left, like going backwards in space. There are 4 key rules to follow for micro apps with linear navigation. First, take advantage of page names to tell the user where they are in the flow. Second, use a progress bar to tell the user where they can go and how many steps are left. The progress bar used here in the right screenshot is from our Submit a Multi-Step Request template. Very handy. What if the user wants to start over? Provide an exit with a header menu or icon. Lastly, include navigation buttons like next and back or previous in a floating bar. The microapp screenshot on the left here is an example of bad signage in linear flow. What's the difference between the back icon and the header and the back button in the floating bar? How many steps remain in this process? The text step 2 of 4 is helpful, but is taking up valuable space on the page. Sometimes there can be small branches off a linear flow, such as in field lookups or a small form entry. How do we maintain consistent signage to allow users to distinguish between these steps in the flow and branches? This can be best accomplished by varying the type of page display. Keep the main steps of the linear process as full page display. Since the user can see the previous page underneath, modals are great to use for branches as they flatten navigation by minimizing perceived levels. Be sure that branches do not go beyond 2 levels away from the main flow, or you risk losing your user. Use the progress bar as an anchor for users and reinforcement that they are on the main path. The progress bar should not be present in branches. For micro apps with tree navigational structures, things get more complex. Here the user is free to move through the micro app pages in no particular order, such as in our Manage Time Off and My Accounts templates. First thing to remember, clear page names are especially important here. For example, in the screenshot on the right, the user can navigate between 3 separate flows of the micro app: My Benefits, My Claims, and My Forms. By naming the page My Forms, the user is 100% clear where he or she is in the micro app. Also, header menus are useful to minimize perceived levels. Without them, the user must navigate back several times to go down a branch of the tree. With a header menu, the user can reach the same page in a fraction of taps. To simplify the navigation, try to use modals for level 3 and above. And lastly, always be sure relevant actions are available when needed, such as navigational controls or main action buttons. Let's switch gears from navigation to language. Careful attention to language can greatly improve the user experience of a micro app. Let's begin by discussing language as it relates to action buttons. All enterprise workflows have action buttons. They represent the transaction point of the micro app and usually how adoption is measured. Therefore, great care must be taken when presenting these buttons to the user. Any confusing placement, styling, or language makes it unclear where the user can navigate to and where the actions he or she can perform, creating friction. First and foremost, always use action-packed verbs and keep them short and sweet. Save, submit, approve, delete, etc. More time spent reading equals more time required to make a decision. Next, group action buttons in bottom floating bars. Having action buttons immediately available without the need to scroll makes things easier for the user. Third, pair opposite and neutralizing actions. The more contrast between the actions, the quicker the decision-making time. Micro app designers can create contrast with color and iconography. Lastly, iOS and Android design guidelines both recommend that affirmative actions, i.e. whatever the proceed action is, be placed on the right, even if they're negative. This is because, number one, users read from left to right and will fixate last on the primary action. Two, right placement results in quicker access to the majority of right-hand users. And three, it helps reinforce the mental model of moving forward in the process by moving right. Consistency is key to reducing decision-making time. Often in enterprise workflows, there are follow-up pages and subsequent steps necessary after a given button is tapped. To reduce the cognitive load for the user, consistent signage and styling is essential. If an action such as reject has a red X icon next to it, carry that same styling and iconography through to the subsequent page, as illustrated in the examples on the left here. This also applies for yes and no follow-up pages. Chart a consistent path by labeling the affirmative action on the following page with the same language and styling. Careful attention to charting consistent paths results in big boosts in usability and is often overlooked. Here are some good and bad examples of clear action buttons. In the first example, all buttons are styled with the same default fill applied. Since there is not enough contrast in the styling, the user is forced to read the label of every button, resulting in greater time and effort needed to make the decision. The screen also fails the squint test, which can be useful to ensure that there is enough contrast between elements. The squint test is pretty straightforward. Display your design on a screen, take a step back, and squint your eyes. If every button looks the same or the screen looks cluttered, it's a problem. The second screenshot here is a wonderful example of what not to do with action buttons. First of all, there should be no more than 3, maybe 4 actions in a floating bar. Also, what exactly is the difference between reject and return, review and review complete? No idea. The two examples on the right have two opposite and neutralizing action buttons that are clearly labeled and styled differently. The two options are clear in both language and styling. Many micro apps make use of save, submit, send, done, and the like. But what exactly is the difference between these similar actions? This is an opportunity to improve upon the source application experience by standardizing nomenclature. Submit is best for forms and new items, and save for editing existing items. While shorter is always better, there may be some cases where adding a word or two actually enhances the user experience. For example, in time entry use cases, submit and save are common actions that the user needs to access in order to successfully log time. In our time entry template, a single word added to each button label further reinforces its meaning. Instead of simply submit, submit timesheet is a bit more specific. Instead of simply save, save progress is better. Let's move on to feedback. If you press a button and nothing happens, you're left wondering, do you press it again? What if instead it takes you somewhere unexpected? Feedback is a core tenet to user experience design. Feedback communicates the result of any interaction, making it both visible and understandable. It tells the user whether or not they are moving closer to accomplishing a task or achieving a goal. Finally, it provides comfort and sense of security. In microapps, feedback is best illustrated in confirmation and error pages. For every action, there's an equal reaction. Reward the user for completing the task with a nice green check mark. These confirmation and error modals are present in our templates and available for quick import into your own microapp. Now, we'll dig into specific elements of your microapp's interface and how you can best arrange these elements to help users complete their task. We'll begin with tabs. Tabs are a very common interface element in digital products. If there is more required information on a single web page than a mobile page can fit, microapp designers can take advantage of what we call page split tabs to group information. Page split tabs organize information from a single web page into multiple tabs. Since the information is pulled from the same web page, there is no load time between each tab, and the user is free to swipe among them. Keep these best practices in mind when implementing tabs. First, place tabs at the top of a page. Natural hierarchy of things go from top to bottom, and users scan a new screen from top to bottom. Sometimes it's useful to place header level information such as text pairs above a set of tabs, but be careful not to put too much. Include no more than 4 maximum. Mobile screen real estate is precious, and with increasing tabs come decreased legibility. Use consistent language and order. Nouns are best without icons. This asterisk here is to remind me to mention that icons can help support a tab label. For example, if 2 tabs have similar words like contacts and contracts. Adding icons can help users distinguish them. Indicate the current location to the user by applying unique styling to the active tab. Remember, where am I is one of the fundamental questions users need to answer to successfully navigate. Number 5, a really important point here, do not use tabs for forms. Why is that? First, a user may reach the end of the tab containing fields and tap the submit button without seeing the other tabs. This is a problem. Second, let's say the user does diligently navigate from tab to tab, filling out the form and tap submit. If they made an error on one of the fields, there's no way to highlight which tab the validation error is on. Finally, another thing to remember about tabs. Floating bars are shared across tabs. Be sure that action buttons contained in a floating bar are relevant on each tab. Here are some examples of what not to do with tabs. We recommend text-only field labels, unless further differentiation between the words are needed, such as in that contacts contracts example. The mixture of both in the first example is very confusing. Second, we'll get into icons a bit later, but remember that universal icons are rare. Using only icons, like in the second example here, as tab labels is never recommended. The space is there for a short text label, so use it. Finally, make sure there's enough contrast with the active tab, but don't get too fancy. In this last example, it's difficult distinguishing which tab I'm currently viewing. Though they look similar, section headers and collapsible groups are different. A section header is a discrete piece of text with a section header preset applied to identify a group of content. A collapsible group, on the other hand, is a collection of grouped controls with a virtual title used to identify the group of content. When should you use a section header versus a collapsible group versus tabs? Let's take a look. Tabs are best used to contain tables. One table per tab works very nicely. Not so much for collapsible groups and section headers. Text pairs, on the other hand, can be grouped by any of the 3, depending on the purpose of the information. We'll talk forms a little later, but it's best to avoid grouping sections of a form in collapsible groups or tabs, since they hide sections that may be required for the user to enter information. Section headers are always open and work great for primary information that needs to be seen. Collapsible groups, since they hide information, are best used for content that is secondary to the use case. They also allow a user to free up screen space if they don't need a section. Finally, it's important to remember that collapsible groups and section headers are affected by hierarchy. Vertical placement is not an issue with tabs, as they hold items at an equal level with one primary tab. With collapsible groups and section headers, order and flow of information is more important. One last thought, it's best not to mix collapsible groups and tabs. Since a tap is already needed to select a tab, requiring an extra tap to expand a nested collapsible group is not ideal. Modals are great for quick branches off the main flow of a microapp. They help flatten the navigation experience for the user by sitting on top of the previous page, providing visibility of the page beneath. Here are some best practices for incorporating modals into your microapp. First, remember to never start your microapp with a modal. Since there's no page beneath it, it's a little jarring and disorienting to see a modal on top of the sign-in page or blank page. Second, always include a clear, visible title that matches the tapped button or icon. Be sure to provide a clear and obvious way for the user to exit the modal, such as a button labeled close or an X icon in the header. Lastly, be sure to keep the content and modals to a minimum. All information should be valuable and relevant. Don't include more than 2 actions. Any more could distract the user to leave the task at hand unfinished. In many mobile and web applications, mobiles are used for confirmations and therefore ever present in our templates. Because error messages can be interruptive, they are also best displayed as modals. Their sudden appearance forces users to stop their current task and focus on this new message. By displaying them in a modal, the interruption is less jarring because the user can still see the page that they were just on. Included here are some common entry points for modals. These examples show the best way to use modals demonstrated by the Manage Time Off microapp template. Note that in the screenshot pair on the left, the modal header matches the selected button that precedes it. The user also has a clear and obvious way to exit if necessary. The screenshot pair to the right features consecutive modals. With 2 consecutive modals like these, be sure they are the same height to provide smooth navigation between the two. A back chevron in the header is useful for the user to navigate back if they wish. Thank you for watching Part 2 of Capriza UX and UI training. Tune in to Part 3 for the rest of the skeleton layer as well as Layer 5, Surface.